Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a lot to unpack today, huh? Language learning, communication strategies, even some teaching tips sprinkled in. You've given me a ton to work with here. Notes, articles, quotes. Looks like we're on a mission to extract the pure gold.
Sounds like my kind of deep dive.
Mm.
I'm always amazed how those aha moments pop up when you connect the dots between different ideas.
Me too. And speaking of connecting the dots, I have to ask about something that jumped out from your notes. Festina lente. Make haste slowly. Has that been your experience, especially with your goal of becoming fluent in Spanish?
It's a guiding principle for me, for sure. It makes me think of that online immersion course you mentioned. Sometimes you have to slow down to speed up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Build that solid foundation.
It's like building a house. You don't start with the roof. And speaking of foundations, you had some fascinating thoughts on grammar, how linguists focus on how native speakers actually talk rather than just rigid rules.
Yeah, it's a real perspective shift. It's about understanding how language is actually used in the wild, not just in textbooks.
So observing and absorbing those natural patterns instead of getting stuck in the grammar rulebooks. Which actually reminds me, you were talking about using ChatGPT for language learning, having it act as your English tutor, helping with homework. Have you tried that?
It's really incredible how technology is changing the game. Can you imagine personalized grammar feedback from an AI tutor? Anytime, anywhere. Speaking of personalized learning, though, you mentioned comprehensible input, Stephen Krashen's work. So it's not just about memorizing words and grammar, is it?
Right. It's about understanding the language you're exposed to.
Exactly. And you've got some clever strategies for that. Watching short videos on interesting topics, especially with different accents. You even mentioned Duolingo and all its characters.
Oh, and I loved your note about Youglish.com. Seeing and hearing phrases in real contexts. That's a goldmine for comprehensible input.
100%.
Mm.
And sometimes the simplest tools are the best. Like you can't go wrong with Google's pronunciation tool. Hearing that correct pronunciation is key.
Like having a pronunciation coach in your pocket. Speaking of pronunciation, you had those tips about slowing down, talking from the back of the jaw, and then there's that sneaky schwa sound. It's everywhere.
Right. It's like the little secret to smooth English, that schwa. You know those notes you had about reading aloud really got me thinking. Comparing pauses to a painter using colors, so cool.
It's amazing how much impact those little pauses and changes in speed have, right? Easy to forget, but reading aloud, especially at that 8,100 words per minute, like you said, it's like internalizing the music of the language.
100%. You even mentioned Stephen Dubner's narration on Freakonomics talk about attention to detail, which actually reminds me of your notes on those tricky English pronunciations. Words ending in is that sound like Z or E sounding like F in cough. Wild.
Like the language is messing with you,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, slowing down, breaking words down, it's like cracking a code.
Totally. And speaking of codes, English grammar has some real head scratchers. That meaningless do you mentioned. In questions, negatives, like a ghost word.
It really does feel like that. And then there's present simple versus present continuous. You pointed out English doesn't even have a true simple present tense, not like some other languages. Small difference, but it changes everything.
Absolutely. And the whole perfect tense thing, meaning completed actions, throws people off.
It's like English grammar has its own secret handshake. Don't forget have to versus must in negative sentences too.
Now, that's a good one. Don't have to, meaning
Yeah.
you have a choice, versus must not.
Mhm.
It's a rule, no way around it. Those subtle differences are tough.
They really are. And prepositions, always a struggle. But I love how you break it down. Providing those worksheets, that tip about asking to do what or for what, helps make it click.
Got to find those memory tricks. But it's not all about grammar, right?
Not great.
You've clearly been thinking about better communication overall. I love those Karen Ebert tips you shared about avoiding all those filler words, that pause before speaking thing, being aware of getting defensive. So smart.
It's crazy how those ums and likes sneak in. But you're right, a little mindfulness goes a long way.
For sure. And that whole idea of labeling you talked about,
Yeah.
subtly acknowledging the other person's feelings, whether in a presentation or just chatting. Powerful stuff.
It's like building understanding right there in the moment. But like you said, has to be genuine, not manipulative.
Right. And you made such a good point about giving advice. Sometimes it can actually make people feel worse. Better to empower them to find their own answers.
Such a good point. Speaking of empowerment, I love your approach to writing. Just getting those thoughts down, messy first draft, then starting fresh for the rewrite.
It's freeing, right? Cuts through the noise and helps you find that clear message. Speaking of clear messages, your use of analogies is brilliant. comparing dog behavior, your thoughts on celebrities, and everything in between. Hilarious and insightful.
Well, you know what they say? Analogy is the fuel and fire of thinking.
Love it. And it ties right into that Daniel Kahneman quote you highlighted. If you care about being thought, credible, and intelligent, do not use complex language where simpler language will do. Wisdom.
It's a good reminder that clarity and simplicity are powerful, especially when things get complex or you're trying to connect on a deeper level.
100%. Which reminds me of that note you had about everyone having something remarkable about them. Such great way to approach conversations, big or small.
Like you're searching for hidden treasure in everyone you meet.
Now that's an analogy. And that focus on rapport, melting the ice of fear right away. That's how you build real connections.
Creates that safe space for people to open up, be themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of reading people, those notes on Chris Voss's negotiation tactics from Never Split the Difference were fascinating. Mirroring, labeling, that silence thing. Genius.
They really are. That 3-step hotel upgrade example you mentioned brings it all to life. But it's bigger than just getting your way, isn't it?
You got it. It's about truly understanding the other side, finding that win-win.
Exactly. And that note about staying curious during a negotiation is huge, too. It reminds me of that saying, curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back.
Never heard that one before. I love it. Speaks to the power of curiosity, opening doors you never even knew were there.
For sure. And, it strikes me that curiosity is kind of a common thread through all this. The language learning, the communication, the negotiation.
It's that drive to learn and connect.
It's like that drive keeps us going, keeps us engaged. And, that Terra quotient you were talking about, tribe, expectation, rank, autonomy. It's like a secret code for understanding people better, isn't it?
It really is. When you get those core human needs that need to belong, to know what's expected, to feel respected and in control, it's like you're speaking the same language even when you're not.
Exactly. And it's like you said before, curiosity and anger can't really coexist, can they? So approaching tough situations with curiosity rather than getting defensive, game changer.
100%. It totally changes the whole dynamic. Like, imagine going into a negotiation or even just a tricky conversation with that mindset.
Right. It's like you're on the same team trying to solve a puzzle instead of being on opposite sides.
Exactly. And honestly, that's what I love most about all this stuff we've been digging into today. There's this thread of connection running through it all, learning languages, mastering communication, even those intense negotiations. It's all about bridging that gap between people.
Building bridges instead of walls.
Yes.
Love that.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It makes you realize all this stuff we've been talking about, it's not just about acquiring skills, right? It's about becoming better human beings, more understanding, more empathetic, more connected.
Totally. It's like, how do we navigate this world, this human experience, with more grace and understanding? Those are the big questions.
For sure. And I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive, don't you? We've covered a ton of ground, but more than that, it feels like we've uncovered some really valuable insights that people can carry with them.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure diving into all this with you. Until next time, everybody, keep learning, keep connecting, and keep exploring those fascinating depths.